Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this 1010 webinar about the new legislative framework network. My name is Els, and if you never met me, I will be the webinar moderator of today. For your information, you are all muted this morning, so should you want to ask a question, you should use the question and answer panel of the GoToWebinar control panel. After the presentation, we will have a look at the questions, and if there is still time left, we will reply your questions. Should your question not be answered today, we will report on that, and we will upload the questions and the answers together with the PowerPoint presentation and the recorded webinar on the website like usual. So please let me invite you or present you the speakers of today. We have two of them. First of all, there is here in the room my colleague Celine Oyen, who is project manager for the policy and stakeholder engagement in the strategy and governance department. And we have today a guest speaker. We welcome Mr. Philippe Portalier, Director Internal Market and Standardization of Orgalim, representing Europe's technology industries. So please, Celine and Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Els, and hi to everybody from Brussels. So today's webinar will give you an overview of the EU products harmonization legislation and how we arrived to the new legislative framework that is currently in place. We will rapidly remind what the old approach is, tackle the new approach and its principles, and end up by the new legislative framework, commonly called the NLF. I will then give the floor to Philippe Portalier from Orgalim, who will share with us a view from the industry on the NLF and the role of standardization. And we will then end up explaining the latest trends we are seeing policy-wise from the European Commission. So the EU products harmonization legislation started with the old approach. The old approach to the European technical legislation implies that the detailed technical requirements are defined in the legislation, which concretely means that the national authorities draw up technical legislation. So legislation is therefore often unwieldy, and it does not prevent barriers to trade within European countries. So nowadays, there are still products covered with old approach directives, such as vehicles, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, food, and cosmetics. In 1985, the Council resolution of 7 May 1985 on a new approach to technical harmonization and standards opened the door to the elimination of barriers to trade for different types of products through technical harmonization. The directives following this new format are commonly known as the new approach directives. These directives are based on total harmonization since they replace diverging national legislation. So this new approach deals with large family of products, for example, machinery, construction products, toys, or horizontal risks, such as electromagnetic compatibility. The new approach is currently the method of harmonization used for most industrial products. But a little reminder on which are the new approach principles. So first of all, the new approach directives define essential requirements. So these essential requirements are the requirements that products must meet to be put on the market, and they are mandatory. The essential requirements indicate the desired outcome without specifying how these requirements need to be achieved. So as these requirements define the results to be attained or the risks to be dealt with, but they do not specify the technical solutions for doing so. It means that the suppliers are free to choose how the requirements are to be met. So essential requirements are therefore written in such a way that they remain valid over time and they do not become obsolete with technical progress. The new approach directives foresee that the European standardization organizations, like CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI, following a standardization request given by the European Commission, will elaborate European standards or identify existing European standards which will offer technical solutions to meet the essential requirements. So these standards are called harmonized standards, and they give presumption of conformity. Another principle of the new approach is about the conformity assessment policy. Standards are voluntary, so there is no obligation to follow or to use the standards. Manufacturers can choose to use another technology. So, however, by applying other technical specifications to meet the requirements, the manufacturer will have to carry the burden of demonstrating that these technical specifications answer the needs of the essential requirements. So, a process that often then involves a third-party conformity assessment body. So, the benefit of using harmonized standards is clear. Products manufactured in compliance with harmonized standards benefit from a presumption of conformity, what we call also the CE marking, with the corresponding essential requirements of the applicable legislation. And in some cases, the manufacturer may benefit from a simplified conformity assessment procedure. Then in 2008, the new legislative framework started to be spoken about at the European Union level. It entered into force in 2010 to further improve the European Union products harmonization legislation. So whilst a significant improvement was made with the new approach framework, the framework did not create the necessary level of trust between member states to allow authorities to accept products they could not vouch for. So there was a clear need to improve the overall coherence and consistency, the notification process, the accreditation, the conformity assessment procedures, CE marking, and market surveillance. So the main purpose was to increase consistency, mainly harmonization, across all these directives, which means concretely having same definitions, same conformity assessment procedures, same accreditation, and market surveillance system. So all this to ensure that the improvement trust level beyond member states among all stakeholders into the new approach system. So in terms of legislation, the NLF consists in 3 pieces. So we have the European Commission Regulation number 765 on accreditation and market surveillance, the decision number 768 on establishing a common framework for the marketing of products, and the regulation 764 to strengthen the internal market for a wide range of other products not subject to EU harmonization. So I think Philippe Portalier will further explain this later on during his presentation. And I give now the floor to Philippe.
Hello, everybody. Sorry for my voice. I'm just getting out of a flu. Just a few words first about Orgalim. For those that do not know us, we are a very old lady founded in 54, and we are representing the European technology industries in mostly 3 branches: electrical, electronic, mechanical, metallic, and also metallic technologies. We have throughout our 44 member associations, we represent the overall industry, European industry, which is accounting 2,171 billion euro GDP, which is equivalent to the GDP of France, to give you an idea. We are one of the main customer of new approach legislation. And this graph is trying to capture what Céline has just presented to you. We have these 2 main pieces of legislation: the regulation 765, which is devising the principle of accreditation, so the way the conformity assessment bodies are assessed for their competence to make their assessment of the compliance of products with legislation. That is also covering market surveillance aspects. And this will be soon changed, because we have a new regulation that is on the verge to be approved by the 3 European institutions. We hope it will boost the efficiency of market surveillance. And we have this decision 768, which is like a template. It represents really what all the policymakers, so meaning starting with the European Commission desk officers when they are dealing with a new legislation on machinery, pressure equipment, whatever. Machinery will be soon revised, and they will have to take into consideration this model. With a number of generic obligations for all economic operators, which are devised in these pieces of legislation, and that serve as a model for all the product-specific or technology-specific legislation that applies to different segments of products. Since a little decade, this new approach model has been extended from product safety legislation to the environment and energy field, and we pushed for that. Why? Because it's really a very flexible model. Since the conformity assessment procedures are devised in usually in the annex of the legislation, explaining what needs to be done by manufacturers for placing their product on the market, following either the possibility of internal production controls, so self-assessment whether the product complies with these essential requirements set by the law, essential safety requirements, environment requirements, energy requirements. And harmonized standards in this context are facilitating the demonstration of conformity to these essential legal requirements. The way this mechanism operates and the relationship between the European Commission and European Standards Organization is described in the Regulation 1025/2012 on European standardization that was adopted in 2012 and put in place since 2013. There is something which is not always very well understood by the European Commission desk officers, and that you probably know, but I would like to clarify once more time, because it's a good way to answer questions to policymakers. There are three dimensions in the European harmonized standards. The first one, of course, is the one that is the most important, that you are working on everyday basis, is in elaborating these standards, is the technical relevance. It has to be fit for the purpose of measurements of interoperability, performance, etc. It's what will really make a difference for a product designer. And then you have this second dimension, which is provided by the internal rules of NLF and ETSI, which is that if there are national conflicting standards, once adopted, the European standards is the only one that matters, and the national standards needs to be withdrawn. So all the members of NLF and ETSI are committed to withdraw their national standards that are conflicting with the European standards. This does not depend from the European Commission. These are internal rules, and it grants really market access in commercial terms, because the customers of companies that are using these products using standards, they will not ask for any other standards because they will be withdrawn. Then you have this third dimension, which is the policy relevance, because the harmonized standards that has been developed in the framework of a request of the European Commission, as explained by Céline, and that is eventually submitted to the European Commission for citation in the official journal, will be giving the presumption of conformity, provided it is the standards is actually used in the design of the product. So in that respect, the use of harmonized standards in designing products is providing a facilitation for the free circulation of goods on the European internal market, because the national member states authorities will not raise a barrier to trade to products that claim compliance in that way with European legislation. So it is quite useful, and it works for over 4 decades. It has been codified in 85, this new approach principle, and of course embedded in all the product-specific legislation, but this is working like that since then. So to summarize, harmonized standards are fit for purpose, fit for the European market, and fit for the 28 member states, provided that the standards is cited in the official journal. So then it's a signal that it is open for use by anyone. And as stressed by Céline, the use of standards is voluntary because there are alternative ways to demonstrate compliance with the law. But well, there is a significant exception. It is in the construction sector where standards are mandatory. But otherwise, for machinery, for pressure equipment, for all the other sectors, the use of harmonized standards is voluntary. Then harmonized standards must be used, of course, in the design of the product. And that's this use which is granting the presumption of conformity with the law. But of course, you have to declare that you have that you are claiming this presumption of conformity in the declaration of conformity that accompanies the product or needs to be provided to the authority upon request. What harmonized standards are not? They are not an extension of the law, despite the recent development and ways the European Commission is now considering the role of standards. Because only the legislator can set the rules and the mandatory rules. They are not free from market pressure, and that's also a common mistake. I mean, of course, a standard is developed by consensus by all parties around the table, but sometimes it could be a great facilitation to access some markets, or it could be a barrier for newcomers on that market if they are not familiar with the standard. So this is an important dimension that is always considered as a must, but if standards are normally technology neutral, they are not free from market pressure. And eventually, standards are necessary to show compliance, are not necessary to show compliance because, again, they are of voluntary use except for construction products. So the European Commission nevertheless considers harmonized standards as resulting from a legal act. And now they consider the citation of standards in the official journal as an official decision of the Commission, which is quite heavy. They are announced that they decided to publish the citation not anymore in the C series of the official journal, but in the L series to demonstrate this. They consider also that standards are engaging their responsibility. So that's the result of the recent court case, James Elliott and Global Garden. And they are considering that they are necessitating a tighter control, including on each technical specifications. And that's why they are asking in their standardization request that harmonized standards should entail an Annex Z for the correspondence between the technical provision of standards and the essential requirements in the law, and also requesting dated reference in standards. Orgalim is very committed to make the new legislative framework a success, continue to be a success, but we have issues, as many industries have raised their concerns to the European Commission with their new legalistic demands. Because it is delaying the time to market for the use of these standards. The scrutiny that the Commission now imposes on standards is growing and growing, and in some sectors like medical devices, construction products, it is dragging in time, and it's absolutely not helpful. If no solution is found shortly, we have already indication from our companies that they might increasingly disregard the benefit of using harmonized standards and will only care for the European standards. So I've seen, for instance, examples in the gas appliance sectors that the TC itself requests the CCMC not to submit the standards for citation in the official journal. And well, international standards are also a good alternative. So that's the situation, and we are very sorry about that. We need really to work together with Sense and NLF to improve this shortly.
So thank you, Philippe, for giving us the view from the industry that we see that you do have some concerns, and this is also why we are actually doing this 1010 webinar on the NLF today, because we've been seeing indeed the last few months, the last year, some trends coming from the European Commission. You mentioned, Philippe, this James Elliott case and the fact that the Commission has seen that they are engaging now their responsibility for this James Elliott case consequences. And because of that, they've started the last year to have some, and we've started seeing new formats for recent standardization requests. So this is something we would like to alert you on, which means concretely that actually the last few standardization requests we received had an expiry date, had deadlines, and had an annex specifying the deliverables and the number of standards, which has all this has a direct implication for you standardizers, which means that we have less flexibility. Philippe reminded that standards do not have to be considered as law, and so this is important for us, and we are currently working on this to try to understand where and what exactly the European Commission wants. They also issued in November last year, a communication on harmonized standards, enhancing transparency and legal certainty for a fully functioning single market. So this communication is actually part of our response to the European Council of March 2018 that requested to assess the state of play on the implementation of the single market legislation and the remaining barriers and opportunities to a fully functioning single market. So there are a lot of positive things in this communication. It shows a clear support for the role of European standards in underpinning the European economy. And it's an initiative taken to facilitate European stakeholders to benefit from the use of standards to comply with legislation under the new legislative framework. However, it also confirms that the European Commission seeks greater influence over the interaction between standards and regulations, and wants to define the way in which harmonized standards and their technical content are presented. So, of course, for us, there is a clear message, is that the principles of the new approach and the NLF, the overall framework, so the new legislative framework, must be safeguarded. We can, of course, we want to improve it. There's always a lot of space to improve things, But the basic and how it all works together should be safeguarded. So we arrive now to the key learning points of today. So first of all, of course, this new approach spirit, the fact that for the moment, thanks to this new approach, we have these essential requirements that are set by legislation, which allow to have market-driven standards still developed by the European Standardization Organization under EU scrutiny. And all this makes it that there is trust and there is a facilitated internal market access. There's also this reminder that standards are a conformity assessment tool, so they're not an extension of the law. And that the harmonized standards provide presumption of conformity, which also brings trust. But as Philippe said, trust not at any cost. So we will see how it evolves. And so the main message, as already said, is really that we would like to preserve the new approach spirit and make the NLF work smoothly for all in the future.